on this edition of News Center. South Korea, the U.S. and the rest of the world are tightening the screw on North Korea with the latest draft UN Security Council resolution, which sanctions everything from nuclear-related materials, aviation fuel, conventional weapons, and luxury goods. U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Daniel Russell in Seoul to discuss North Korea says that deployment is not a bargaining chip, while the U.S. appears to have taken a step back from aggressively pushing forward with that deployment in South Korea. And the political opposition bloc's filibuster is still going strong, delaying a scheduled vote to approve key bills, including one that redraws the nation's electoral map. News Center begins right now. It is 8 a.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in Barcelona, and 10 on a Friday night here in Seoul. Hello and welcome to our viewers all across the globe. You're watching Arirang News Center. The toughest sanctions yet on North Korea is what the U.S. has called as it presented a draft resolution to the UN Security Council in response to its latest nuclear test and missile launch. Officials say the draft is meant to ensure Pyongyang will be held accountable for its actions. Our foreign affairs correspondent GeunHye starts us off with the details of the draft resolution.
It will represent the strongest sanctions against North Korea in more than 2 decades, if passed. That's according to U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Samantha Power, presenting the China-backed U.S. proposal of the new resolution's draft at the UN Security Council's meeting in New York Thursday. South Korean ambassador to the UN, Oh Jun, said the new sanctions are twice the strength of existing ones. They would include mandatory inspections of cargo, expansion of a weapons ban, and blacklisting North Korean individuals and entities. New are the so-called sectoral sanctions, a ban or restrictions on specific commodities such as coal, iron, gold, titanium, or rocket fuel.
These sanctions, if adopted, would send an unambiguous and unyielding message to the DPRK regime. The world will not accept your proliferation.
An official at Seoul's foreign ministry told reporters Friday there has been focus on how to ensure that sanctions are not detrimental to the people of North Korea, stressing that they are, quote, targeted sanctions aimed at the regime's leadership. The issue was also discussed with U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs Daniel Russell at Seoul's foreign ministry Friday. He told reporters that he got the chance to assess the diplomatic progress at the UN with Seoul's Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se. He also made clear that China's agreement with the U.S. on the Council's draft is not linked to the delay of South Korea-U.S. talks on the U.S. defense systems deployment in South Korea.
There's no connection between what is going on in the diplomatic track in the UN Security Council and the question of the deployment of THAAD, because THAAD is not a diplomatic bargaining chip. It's not a lever that diplomats use in our discussions.
Meanwhile, officials say the UN resolution could be adopted as early as Friday Eastern Standard Time, should the 15 members convene and vote for a unanimous yes. But it may have to be approved next week, as Russia, one of the veto-wielding members, reportedly needs more time to review the draft. GeunHye, Arirang News.
New draft UN sanctions on North Korea target a much wider range of Pyongyang sources of revenue and weapons technology than previous UN penalties against that regime. Now, they also seek to tackle a critical flaw in past sanctions packages: failure by UN member states to police the directives. The key message: enough is enough. Our Kim Min-ji breaks down the draft for us.
There have been 5 sets of UN sanctions imposed on North Korea, but this time round they're said to be more stronger and more effective than before, all aimed at making it difficult for North to raise funds and further develop its nuclear and missile programs. For the first time, UN member states would be required to inspect all cargo going into and out of the communist regime. Until now, inspections were limited only to ships suspected of carrying weapons of mass destruction. If adopted, the resolution would also call for suspicious vessels carrying illicit items to be denied access to ports of UN member states. The draft also calls for a ban on mineral resources, including coal and iron, a major source of hard currency for the communist state. Coal accounts for more than 40% of the regime's total exports. Thus, this measure is expected to take a toll on Pyongyang's finances. All arms and weapons will be prohibited from sales to Pyongyang, unlike previous sanctions, which only covered nuclear weapons, ballistic missiles, and heavy weapons. Moreover, there will be a ban on aviation and rocket fuel supplies to the north, as well as a ban on North Korean flights suspected of carrying illicit products. The draft resolution also calls for financial sanctions targeting banks and assets, as well as blacklisting 17 North Korean individuals and 12 entities involved in the development of missile technology. The resolution would also require states to expel North Korean diplomats involved in illegal activities and ban the North's imports of luxury products. The sanctions are broader in scope and target more pressure points in hopes that they would put an end to Pyongyang's nuclear ambitions, while ensuring the people of North Korea are not affected negatively. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
So will sanctions work this time around? Let's get some perspective on this. For that, Dr. Kim Han Guan, professor at Korea National Diplomatic Academy, is live in the studio with me. Professor Kim, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, the new draft sanctions has been hailed as unprecedented. It's said that it's a major upgrade to any other previous ones, but tougher than ever. What is your overall assessment of the draft resolution?
As you just mentioned, and many mass media already reported, it is the toughest the resolution sanction on the North Korea for the past 20 years. More precisely, after the resolution sanction on Iraq in the early 1990s when Iraq invaded Kuwait. So probably this time the international community showed their clear and stern position over North Korean nuclear test. And this time also different. One most important thing is before there has been loopholes the launch sanctions over North Korea because of the Chinese government did not really seriously participated in the sanction. But this time the Chinese government also agreed on the necessity to enhance sanctions on North Korea.
Right, so with the China factor in mind, there have been numerous past sanctions. This is not the first time that North Korea has been imposed sanctions. How do we know that this will be effective, that this one will work?
The Chinese government access to understand this North Korean nuclear threat, not only between China and the DPRK relationships or the Chinese strategy toward the Korean Peninsula, but the Chinese government also consider this North Korean nuclear threat is the important factor between China and U.S. strategic competition in the global level. So this time, the Chinese government discussed with the United States for 2 days. Then they reached an agreement that this time we need to enhance the sanctions on North Korea because non-proliferation issue is very important. And also at the same time, the U.S. government already passed in their Congress to the law of enhanced North Korean sanctions. It includes the secondary boycotts. The secondary boycotts probably affect very important sanction on North Korea, but at the same time, it can also give suffers the pain to the Chinese companies who traded with North Korea. So the Chinese government also protect their own business.
Right. So how do you expect the sanctions to be felt on the ground in Pyongyang? How are they actually going to feel that pain?
Many North Korean experts said that Kim Jong-un regime already asked for their own people prepare for another march of adios. But it is very clear that Kim Jong-un regime would be suffered from the shortage of money for the budget for developing their own nuclear development program, as well as the political money for Kim Jong-un by himself to consolidate his own political power and legitimacy in North Korean society.
Now, Professor Kim, I know that your expertise lies in China. So, read between the lines for us. Is China fully on board in imposing these sanctions?
That's good questions. Actually, China initially agreed on the contents of the UN Security Council draft resolution. And the Chinese government also agree on that the international community enhance sanction on North Korea. But at the same time, Chinese government in the future, anytime can change their positions due to their strategic calculation under the US-China strategic competition in the world society. At the same time, their bilateral relations with North Korea can change anytime. So the sincere the participation of China in the sanctions over North Korea remain, many things remain to be seen.
Right. Also, finally, how do we expect North Korea to react to this? I'm sure Pyongyang will not just sit there and be, I suppose, threatened by these sanctions.
We hope that probably international community hope that the Kim Jong-un regime will reconsider their nuclear development program, and they choose the peaceful relations with other international society members. But we also worried about that instead of participated in the discussions in the six-party talks, and North Korea joining the negotiation table. But Kim Jong-un regime can choose the military provocation, including another nuclear test, as well as the satellite or long-range missile test. In that case, probably things will be more the bad situation. So we have to think of two ways, and we ask North Korea made efforts to lead North Korea to the negotiation table.
Right, but at the same time, be fully prepared for any kind of military provocations by the North.
That's true, definitely.
Dr. Kim Han Guan, a professor at Korea National Diplomatic Academy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Now, moving on, it seems like Chinese Foreign Minister Wang's meeting with his U.S. counterpart has exerted influence over Washington's THAAD stance, while making it clear that China still considers denuclearization first and peace treaty next as being the better option. Our Lee Ji-won fills us in on the top Chinese diplomats' moves.
Has Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi's meeting with U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry led to a shift in Washington's decision to deploy its anti-ballistic missile defense system in South Korea? That seems to be the case, as the U.S. Pacific Commander Admiral Harry Harris Jr. said neither Seoul nor Washington have agreed to put a THAAD in South Korea at a Pentagon briefing on Thursday. The military's top commander in the Pacific also made clear that the decision to discuss the deployment of THAAD does not necessarily mean the two allies will deploy the system, leaving room for possible changes in the future. In the wake of North Korea's long-range missile launch, Seoul and Washington were set to sign an agreement on holding talks to deploy the THAAD system in South Korea, aimed at deterring Pyongyang's nuclear threats. But this was abruptly postponed on Tuesday ahead of a meeting between Wang and Kerry in Washington. adding to speculations that China's strong opposition to deploying THAAD in the Korean peninsula may have played a role in the setback. The Chinese diplomat had strong words against the deployment.
I must point out that the X-band radar associated with the THAAD system has a radius that goes far beyond the Korean peninsula and reaches into the interior of China. We believe China's legitimate security concerns must be taken into account and a convincing explanation must be provided.
Wang also strongly pushed for holding both denuclearization and peace treaty talks in parallel, a stance that conflicts with Washington. The U.S. had maintained there will be no talks to formally end the Korean War unless North Korea gives up its nuclear weapons program. With China strongly opposing to the THAAD deployment and Beijing pushing to hold denuclearization talks with North Korea in tandem with peace treaty talks, Wang's trip to Washington may signal the start of changes in the diplomatic landscape surrounding Pyongyang. 이지원, Arirang News.
After a decade of being under construction, the Jeju Civil-Military port is now complete and open in the southern resort island of Jeju. Now, the port will serve to better counter North Korean naval threats as well as to secure South Korea's sea routes. Our Defense Ministry correspondent Kim Han Guan files this report from Jeju.
South Korea's Navy honor guards show off their maneuvers to mark the completion of the civil-military harbor on the southern tip of Jeju Island. Prime Minister Wang gave a speech at the opening ceremony. He was joined by other politicians and military officials, including Defense Minister Han Min-gu. Wang emphasized that the Korean peninsula is in a critical situation, with North Korea recently conducting its fourth nuclear test and long-range missile launch.
North Korea's ruthless provocations continue, but with our Navy stationed here, we will be able to more strongly counter the regime's threats. This base will also serve to protect our country's rights and interests in the South Sea, which is a lifeline for our economy.
The base will station an estimated 3,000 naval personnel and covers nearly 500,000 square meters. Over $800 million have been invested in the harbor since construction began in 2006. This civil military port in Jeju has the capacity to dock 2 150-ton cruise ships and 20 warships at any given time. The port will enhance the South Korean Navy's capabilities to counter North Korean provocations in the East and West Seas.
Our Navy's Aegis destroyer and submarines are stationed here to suppress North Korea's provocations. As it was demonstrated when we detected Pyongyang's rocket debris, this location is a strategically important point.
The new port will also serve as a naval choke point from where North Korea would need to pass to sail further out to international waters. Kim Han Guan, Arirang News, Jeju Island.
President Park Geun-hye has entered her fourth year in office, and to mark the occasion, we've been bringing you a series of special reports. In the final of our 5-part series, we take a look at how President Park's handling of inter-Korean affairs has shifted with the continued provocations from North Korea. Our Unification Ministry correspondent Connie Kim has this report.
At the start of her term, President Park Geun-hye offered a vision for the reunification of the two Koreas. In her New Year's press conference in 2014, she delivered a strong message on reunification.
저는 한마디로 통일은 대박이다. 이렇게 생각을 합니다.
Later that year in Dresden, a symbolic city for German reunification, President Park laid out her plan for Korean reunification in 3 major areas: humanitarianism, integration, and prosperity. She also launched a presidential reunification preparation committee later in the year. Over the next 2 years, Seoul moved forward with inter-Korean cultural and assistance projects to improve relations with Pyongyang, even when tensions between the two Koreas spiked in August 2015, when landmines on the border planted by North Korea exploded, injuring 2 South Korean soldiers. And a landmark inter-Korean agreement reached after the conflict seemed to push relations between the two Koreas in a new direction, with a new round of family reunions seeming to offer hope for the future. However, with North Korea's nuclear test and long-range missile launch, President Park has made clear that inter-Korean relations will only improve when Pyongyang gives up its nuclear weapons program.
This marks a sizable shift to a more hardline stance against the North. That shift was evident in the president's decision to shut down the inter-Korean Kaesong industrial complex, which is the most drastic step to contain the North the president has taken so far. And she's warned there are more sanctions to come.
국민 여러분, 이제 기존의 방식과 선의로는 북한 정권의 핵 개발 의지를 결코 꺾을 수 없고 북한의 핵 능력만 고도화시켜서 결국 한반도의 파국을 초래하게 될 것이라는 점이 명백해졌습니다.
Most North Korea watchers say Pyongyang's repeated provocations have tested the limits of President Park's trust-building initiative.
There is a limit to what you can do to push for security on the Korean Peninsula and build inter-Korean cooperation while North Korea continues its nuclear and missile development. This imbalance has been raised as a fundamental problem with her trust politic.
But just as out of every crisis, opportunity arises. Experts say this is a time to review policies that could improve relations.
Talks with North Korea after an escalation in tensions will be inevitable for as long as the regime exists. The Park administration should not rule out the possibility of holding dialogue with the reclusive regime when reviewing its North Korea policies.
Whether President Park is able to strike a balance between security and cooperation, between punishment and dialogue in a North Korea policy, is a question that'll be answered when her term comes to an end in 2018. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Over in Seoul's National Assembly, lawmakers from the opposition bloc continue with their marathon filibuster to stop the passage of a counterterrorism bill. Now, that means that the pre-scheduled parliamentary session to vote on the country's electoral map has been postponed. Our Shin Se-min has more from the parliament.
The filibuster continues, uninterrupted by a plenary session scheduled for Friday, as the two political parties remain at odds over the controversial counterterrorism bill. The pre-scheduled voting session was made obsolete as the National Election Commission missed its deadline set by the Assembly Speaker GeunHye to submit the electoral map bill to the Assembly for a floor vote. With the delay, pending state affairs like the electoral constituency and North Korean human rights bills will need to be addressed during the next session scheduled for Monday, 29th. Leading up to the cancellation of the parliamentary session, there were hopes that either the filibuster of the counterterrorism bill or the country's electoral map would be resolved. Under the current law, filibuster cannot coincide with parliamentary session. In order for pending issues like the country's electoral map to be voted on, the filibuster session must come to an end, which would automatically put the disputed counterterrorism bill up for a floor vote. The opposition party believes that the counterterrorism bill will allow the National Intelligence Service to conduct surveillance on civilians if deemed a terror threat. The ruling Saenuri party stressed the bill's importance, citing that Korea is one of 4 countries among the combined 42 OECD and G20 nations that does not have an anti-terrorism law in place, despite the growing terror threats around the world. With more delays in state affairs already behind schedule, concerns are mounting that the failure to resolve the country's electoral map at the plenary session on Monday may even lead to the postponement of the April 13th general elections. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
More Koreans are spending less as they're making less amid mounting debt and feeble recovery momentum. Our Wang looks into this trend.
Facing sluggish recovery momentum, Korean households are leaning towards saving money instead of spending it. Statistics Korea says the average propensity to consume stood at 71.9% last year, the lowest level since the related data was first compiled in 2003. The record low figure comes on the back of subdued growth of households' income that rose at the slowest pace last year since 2009 when the country was hit hard by the global financial crisis. The average annual income of households stood at slightly over 4.3 million won, which is roughly $3,500. The slow growth came as earnings of those self-employed dropped after the MERS outbreak put a dent in overall consumption, which had already been suffering from the fizzling economy. And experts say the trend to refrain from spending is not expected to change in the near future, as it's also stemming from longer-term challenges like the aging population and mounting household debt.
The government is pouring efforts into propping up domestic demand through measures like cutting consumption tax. But such measures will have limitations because the current slowdown is a result of structural issues.
So the latest figure once again points to the importance of pushing through the structural reforms that President Park Geun-hye has been emphasizing since last year. But experts say that the 2 years remaining in her term is not enough time to realize such reforms, and that the Park administration should focus more on laying out a solid plan than actual results. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
One of the world's biggest tech shows, the Mobile World Congress, ended this week. For more on what gained traction during the 4-day event and what failed to steal the limelight this year, our Kim Ji-yeon joins us from Barcelona. Now, Ji-yeon, before we get to that, how was the last day of the MWC?
I've been to all corners of the venue for the past 4 days, and what I can tell you is that crowds of people don't seem to thin out, even on the last day of this year's MWC. Virtual reality devices, 5G networks, and mobile security solutions took center stage at this year's Mobile World Congress. Security software programs are critical in the era of the Internet of Things, in which every device is connected to the World Wide Web. Korea's Samsung SCS brought its Knox workspace platform for Samsung mobile devices. With the app, private or company data is isolated from other data on the device on a separate environment, often called a container, and encrypted to protect against malware and external attacks. A Samsung product consultant explains a situation in which someone could protect sensitive corporate data even after losing a phone.
First thing I do is I call the IT admin and tell him I've lost my phone. He locks my Knox container, so all of the business data is secure. But after 2 minutes, I turn over a bit of paper on my desk and there it is. I call him back and he unlocks it. If after 2 hours I still haven't found it, so what he'll do is wipe the container.
VR devices definitely got the lion's share of attention at this year's MWC. Samsung's 40-year VR theater, a popular attraction at last month's Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, was popular again here, with people waiting in line for nearly an hour to try it out. That was the same story for Korea's largest mobile carrier, SK Telecom, with its virtual reality submarine experience. Korea-based LG Electronics also had a small 4C VR experience corner that was packed with people too. That's in stark contrast to last year's MWC, where VR was on the fringes, and smart cars and wearables, including smartwatches and smart bands, were all the rage. This year's MWC is a reminder of how fickle and unpredictable IT trends are. What's cool this year may not be the next, but one thing's for sure, whoever was here this year will come back in 2017. Kwon-young?
Well, I'll bet you're right about that. Thank you, Ji-yeon, for that report. Iranians are voting in their first election since debilitating sanctions were lifted after last year's nuclear deal. Bruce Harrison is live in the studio with me. Bruce, what will the outcome of this vote say about Iran's decision to enter this nuke deal?
Hi, Kwon-young. Well, the way Iranians vote today is going to determine if the country continues down a new path, which is emerging from years of diplomatic and economic sanctions. The contest, it pits current President Hassan Rouhani against conservatives who oppose the warming ties right now with Western powers after the nuclear deal was struck. Now, what's at stake? The country's 290-seat parliament and the 88-member Assembly of Experts. Now, this Assembly of Experts, it's not a government body you would see in a Western republic. Its members choose the Islamic Republic's most powerful figure, the supreme leader. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has held that position since 1989, and if the Assembly at some point has to choose a successor to Khamenei, who's 76 years old, that decision could determine Iran's direction for years or decades to come. As for how voters are thinking, opinions were mixed in Tehran's Grand Bazaar.
The most important issue is economic prosperity. Now society really needs jobs. Unemployment is so rampant because I feel it, I see it.
One should not be indifferent. I vote for the future of our country and for a higher level of our welfare.
If enough of President Rouhani's allies end up in parliament, it could allow him to keep pursuing economic reforms at home and diplomatic engagement. Still, conservative establishments like Iran's Guardian Council hold enough power that can make reform difficult regardless of who controls the parliament. Finance ministers and central bank chiefs of the G20 have gathered in Shanghai, where China's economy is a major focus. Beijing seeks to restore confidence in its economy, and the governor of China's central bank told other nations on the sidelines of the meeting Friday that China's exports are strong and currency devaluation is not being considered.
Trade surplus was nearly $600 billion, so we will not want to participate in competitive currency depreciation in order to boost China's exports.
The possibility of Britain leaving the European Union is also a focal point at the meeting. Some economists say its exit could shock the world economy because it would raise questions about the future of the European Union as a whole.
Now, Bruce, let's talk about FIFA. FIFA is looking to move on to and leave behind a dark chapter in its history as it prepares to vote for a new president.
Yeah, very dark, and they're expected to vote sometime in the next few hours. 200 delegates of the FIFA organization are gathered in Zurich right now. They're going to vote for who will succeed banned President Sepp Blatter. The acting president of the World Soccer body said this is a watershed moment in the history of FIFA, and the whole world is watching.
Unfortunately, FIFA has too often been at the center of the world's attention for all the wrong reasons. But we have the possibility to change this and show that the vast majority of FIFA's members is committed and involved in football for all the good reasons.
Ahead of the election, a wide-ranging set of reforms were voted in as well.
So, Bruce, among the candidates, who's favored to take over FIFA?
Well, there's two front-runners right now. The favorite is the head of the Asian Football Confederation. His name's Sheikh Al-Khalifa. And then you have the UEFA's Swiss head. His name is Gianni Infantino, and he's a close second in the running right now.
Right, and we will find that out in the next few hours.
Not too long.
All right, Bruce, thank you so much for today and all of this week, and we'll see you on Monday.
My pleasure.
Well, time now for the latest weather update. Let's go live to our GeunHye at the Weather Center. GeunHye, so far the weather here in the central region, nothing to complain about, but a mix of rain and snow has been falling in the southern provinces.
That is right. Even right now, as we speak, central parts of the country are seeing some rain and snow, and more clouds are building up and moving into the country. And there's a possible heavy snow advisory in place in parts of Gangwon-do province and the northern parts of Chungcheong-do provinces, with up to 7 centimeters of snow piling up by tomorrow, but things will get cleared by tomorrow morning. But despite the precipitation, we'll still have dusty conditions tomorrow in most parts of the country, so being outside for too long, not a good idea. Similar temperatures as today for your Saturday, as the daily low here in Seoul will kick off at 0 degrees Celsius, 6 for Busan and 9 in Jeju. And as for the daily highs, Seoul will top out at 7, 13 for Daegu and 14 over in Busan. Now it seems like winter weather is in store for your Sunday afternoon, with below average temperatures expected to early next Tuesday, which is the March 1st Independence Movement Day here in Korea. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
Well, that is our broadcast on this Friday night. I'm Moon Geun-young. Thank you, as always, for watching. And we hope to see you right back here, same time Monday on NewsCenter.